Yeah.
So I know I proposed a meeting, but I think there was Marcin would like to have the meeting earlier, just to get something going. I guess the summary, if anything, from the last meeting that we had, the Sandeep, myself, I think was um, Vim was there, and then a couple other people from Samsung were there. Victor was there too. We were talking about a mechanism, proposing a mechanisms for getting Prometheus up and running on the workload clusters for now. But then we want aggregations at some point. But then at this point, if we have a best practice way of doing that, and then to test out that, we'll likely have to kind of mock or do something. But there are many suggestions. 35GC, FYI, does not emit a lot of metrics at all. They're field, so it's not like absolutely nothing. There are some. They do have a UI. They have a web UI. So those things, the things that the web UI displayed, there's a REST API, corresponding REST API for those. Very field, not the thing that Sandeep's looking for, for sure. More subscriber-based informations mainly. So real metrics are kind of tough to come by from Free5GC, but then that's not the point anyway. So we can mock it. We can do something. We can poll. We can do something sophisticated. We can poll Linux related metrics and send it out. But the idea more or less is basically just let's create some sort of best practice things to bring up Prometheus. And I think we talked about that last time. And again, for your information, Martin, is that we talk about watcher agents and stuff. So I would like to say there's a difference between status and things that would actually lead us to derive a status, right? Metrics being the primary things that would be used to know whether or not we're hitting the as intended. So are we satisfying users' intent? And then if it says no, or yes, that's reflected on the status. And the status that we define right now for XXX deployment, UPF, AMF, or SMF, is simple. It's practically nothing, actually, to be honest. So it's we either have to make them more sophisticated, or we have some high level things that would aggregate status and then make more educational guests on a high layer. But if we do want operators to be able to read, to be able to detect, if you will, there's a more complicated, more intent-driven status where it meets an intent. We would need the operators somehow be able to poll informations to make that decisions instead of having it aggregated on management clusters and then start sending it down. So hence there's the idea that, hey, do we need a more of a local Prometheus node, and then be able to get the information, and then maybe the operators would pull information from that and make a decisions on status. So there's a difference between the status things that we did, and then watcher agent isn't meant to be a metrics aggregator. It's there to post status. I mean, as people point out, we could, once we get the Prometheus side of the things moving, we may be able to use the same framework, but then that's probably the next step. But then the first thing to take care of is exposing metrics. And again, someone has to do some work to expose even dummy metrics for Free5GC. And then the more important thing, which is probably going to be part of Nephio moving forward, would be our best practice of how to create this Prometheus node or whatever Sandeep is doing now, Prometheus. Because last time we were thinking, oh, let's put like a local server directly on there,
Yeah.
which is interesting because I set up Prometheus on my past life, but then like the simplest way possible. So I'm not going. I don't think I know the nuances of how to set up Prometheus on a more
Yeah.
complicated ways. So I mean, I can give it to Sandeep to talk about this. I
I
mean,
can,
unless
yeah, I can do
Marcin,
that.
unless Marcin has any questions, what do you want to get
Yeah,
out of
please.
that meeting? With this meeting, I mean, I think that's the first question we should ask him.
So yeah, so I've been tinkering also with agent-based Prometheus right now, and this meeting is sort of for me like a way to sync with you guys, because we've had in Orange Innovation a lot of guys who have in the past worked with even getting metrics that have something to do with 5G core based on eBPF. And so I can reach out to those guys internally. And we've also been discussing, yes?
Yeah, cool.
Okay. And we've also been discussing observability in Nephio internally. So this meeting is sort of like an indication for you guys that I have some time to look into this, and I'd like to look into this. And I was not actually sure how to proceed, since usually there's like a design document on something similar.
So there is very early on the R1 cycle, Google published a bunch of seed code. So as part of that seed code, there's a status. The watcher agent, that's indicated in this picture here. The watcher agent is part of that code. The code has a edge watcher, which is a library, and then it has a very God controllers that takes the whole thing and put it by itself. So as part of the R1 work, we split that off, and it becomes the edge status aggregator, and then we kind of get rid of the NF deployed controller, and then I rewrote part of that as NF topology, but then it didn't make it to R1 anyway. So that's some of the basic things that we have so far. Yeah.
One question there that I have swimming here. So what for me is a bit, if you look to the watcher agent itself, you basically locally, let's say, watch the resource in the cluster, and then you expose it via gRPC, right?
Yeah.
Why did you not basically watch it straight from the management cluster? So basically you do a watch on the, because so the reason I'm asking this question is I have been recently looking at the infra to cluster, right? So infra to NF to infra. And so most likely we will need some metrics from the workload cluster with respect to resources. But I found it way more straightforward to basically watch straight the Kubernetes API server rather than building a gRPC service in between to do the same.
The history behind that, actually, if anything, is that the simple question is the management cluster does not necessarily have the kube control credentials to pull things. So but then you would be able to do that using config sync. So let's be honest, it's not like it's not doable.
No, not even. So config sync doesn't do that, I think.
It doesn't pull complicated status. So config sync knows built-in resources. And then when we started talking about this, John was saying that perhaps we'll teach them how to be able to read statuses from custom resources. I think that's actually too much on config sync, and then config sync team never
I agree with
work
that.
anyway. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons. That's why we don't pull it directly, because kube control config credentials is not in the management cluster. So
yes, we do.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, because I mean, I did so I actually did last week. Basically, I did a prototype to actually get the status from the cluster. So you basically read the credentials, because we anyhow need them to deploy all these we need to deploy config sync, right? Before a workload cluster is up. So for that we need kubectl credentials. So we have them. I mean, I can share some code because even for intercluster wiring, right, I'm using it.
I see. Yeah, so because the original the product piece, I guess, if you will, of this, we never actually had it. So the only communication channels that we've always had is basically just the gig repo, and then the dimension cluster just keep on sending states on the deployment repos, and then they just thrive over there. So I mean, I'm not again, I'm not saying that gRPC
The
channels
reason
are
I'm
good
saying
to
is because it's way more simple because you don't need anything on the workload cluster at all to get this information. Is what I'm trying to get to.
you don't need
And
any
you
information.
will have access to any resource. Of course, depending on credentials to watch, right? So that means you can. So that means you don't have to add an additional service, basically, which is always good in my view because less code is less problems.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
okay, well, let's get back
Yeah,
to
that's a
that.
different. I just wanted
Yeah.
to understand because in that case,
Mm.
watcher agent on the workload cluster basically disappears.
Okay. Yeah, let's go into
Let-
what Sandeep wants to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, it's just a continuation, an update from the previous thing that we can use Prometheus, and I've been checking many things in the Prometheus offers. So the main use case which I'm targeting is not the other matrices, like for example, the CPU information, the other resource related information. The thing which I was want to do POC and I was exploring the capabilities about how do I get the 35GC NF's KPI. So for example, AMF throughputs and all the things, the actual KPIs which NF can expose. So we already discussed this. This is a little tricky part in a sense, like not every NF exposes as of now, and it's difficult for ask everyone to do that. But since 35GC, we have. I'm sorry, I'm not able to
No,
pronounce your
Privilege
name.
has very limited things.
Yeah, and we have a marketing. Sorry.
Again, that line doesn't matter because it's not Prefab GC not having it is not the point of us doing this anyway. So we can mock it, we can do something, or as Marcin said, if he has some PPF things that we can use, we can use it.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
somehow,
so your
yeah.
part just kind of someone else will take care of that for you is probably what I
Yeah,
would
if
like
not, I can do myself a POC and I create an API, create a custom web services, right? And through that, I can get those. I assume that as a API, target API, and from there I can just scrap it up and put it into the time series database, and from there up to the metric services.
Well, it's Prometheus, so you're listening on a port anyway. So
yeah. So that's the point. I would maybe I was interested on the POC on these lines. Right, to have an NF API exposed by someone, or I can create my own, and from there I just do it. So what in the last meeting, even Wim has suggested that this can be a kind of a prototype, or this can be a kind of an example to do that. Not necessarily we ask everyone to do the same thing. The thing what he also suggested that what kind of KPI needs to be monitored and what KPI you want to monitor is what something we can focus on, right? So for example, user can provide the KPIs details from UI or somewhere, and then we can schedule a kind of a rule or job creator or API watcher here using this metric service adapter, and thus a pull request can be all the time going, and some sort of
so that's fun. So the question I have is the set of metrics that maps to your KPI would vary between different vendors, right?
Yeah, depends upon like metrics. Yeah, the KPI names has to match, right? If it is available, then only it will be given. So that's a constraint. Yeah, we need to look into that. But that's the sort of a ideal scenario I want to get in, and variations we can see. Is what I'm trying to say.
Another case I was thinking about, I think we talked about that last time, is if the operator on the on the workload clusters would be able to get metrics and perhaps make a decision on a particular status. Would that be something that is doable on in this setup?
Sorry, could you repeat your question? Suppose there is
so there's a network function operator. So the 35GC operator sitting there,
Yeah.
and then they said, "Oh, I want to grab metrics of the CPU consumptions on this pod container." You pull it by containers. There's only one containers on that pod, so that's fine. And then or memory consumptions or anything like that. So is that something they can do from
that's
the
okay.
Prometheus no exporter, or
that's possible, but we need to see how Prometheus gets that, either by API, or is it can read some file system, like all this detail which this operator is collecting, it can put it in some sort of a log, and then Prometheus can read the logs files and all those things. That's also one way, right? Or if it's not, it's not
maybe I'll share some code. I have some code here, right? So basically, what I did in the past, right, is basically build a web service, right, that is able to expose any metric you want. I need to see where the code is because it's a while ago. But so, because what you have with the node exporter, right, is, I mean, it's similar, but you are constrained to which metrics you have, right? I think you have, so what you want, I think, is something that on which you can plug in any metric you want on the workload cluster.
Yes.
So you want to have some ability to be flexible with respect to that. And then because in Prometheus they scrape every X amount of seconds. So what I did is I hold them in memory. And so with the gRPC service, you can subscribe to them.
Okay. You want to share something now?
I don't have the code. I need to look up where the code is.
Okay.
And where it is in Nokia somehow, whether I can pull it out or something like that. But I did something like that, which we, by the way, used in Google with Antos.
Right. That will be great, actually.
How does it work? You're using a web server that runs locally, I guess.
A local web server. So it's a local web. So it's basically a local scraper at the end of the day that runs in the workload cluster. You point it to a set of metrics. I was able to, via CRDs, say which metrics to subscribe to. And then it was going to fetch them, right? And then it holded, so it kept an in-memory copy of the last information. And so, for example, if someone in the cluster needed that metric or that information, he could subscribe to it, right? And then it had the Prometheus exporter, so any Prometheus scraper could pick them up and then send them off to the management cluster or whatever it was. Because in Google Antos, you have like a local scraper inside of the cluster itself. So it was doing it. So basically, it was doing it automatically by just, I think, annotating the names. You had to annotate the service or something like that.
I see. Okay, so there's
so
there's a local scraper that scrape whatever metrics is being exposed. And then, but then the scraper would be scraping directly from the pod itself.
Device. So sometimes, for example, what we did is, for example, for our own core, right, our own NF, we had a sidecar proxy that was sitting. So you can do something similar, I think, in 3.5GC.
So that's actually one of the things I was thinking of doing. If there's nothing else better to do, I would probably just put that in there, and then post some Linux metrics and then just send it out.
Or you can do eBPF or something if Martin
eBPF,
so you basically have access to more, and you can so potentially more information. So you have a local sidecar, and that's it basically exports to that scraper, if you will. Then you have a common collector in the cluster that can be used for anything and has a Prometheus export, basically.
I see. So they would...
Right, actually, similar lines, actually. Yeah.
So it's basically the exporter instead of that would be the scraper. The scraper would be able to still read from a particular port that you exposed or the port that you agree on. That would be the service monitoring port. They would pull metrics off of that port and then use the regular channel to send it back to so that
Mm.
Prometheus server we would pull from that, and then from that point on, you store them as time series as usually is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
I think yes,
okay,
that's a nice
I
thing.
mean,
And
it's the
similar
same.
lines.
Yeah,
Good.
if you have code, then great.
Yeah, I need to
Yeah.
find the code, but and I could basically instruct it which metrics to collect based on a CRD.
I see.
So, will this be generic enough to get any kind of metrics which can user define, or do I need to change something? Like for example, if I say that I want the throughput from this particular AMF, NF, right?
Yes, it would have done it. Yeah, I mean, of
Mm.
course, see, there's two constraints, right? So one is okay, if you do it CRD controlled, right? So what I did is I built a very generic CRD, which was basically saying put this metric and then
Yeah, the name of the metrics, and then just pull it directly.
yeah, so and there
Actually,
I think I used like GNMI or something like that. So basically through a path that you say, right? You basically know which metric this is related to, and it would then find the element in question that was providing that metric. So you need two things. One is that routing somehow. So you need a routing capability to know which endpoint that has the metric and a way to convey that you have to route through the right elements. Huh? And then you have to, of course, have the element be able to provide the collection, right?
all right.
I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
whether
actually,
the last thing is fully there. That I don't think I fully did, but that was one thing. Yeah, I need to check the code whether I added that at the end of the day.
yeah, actually, the similar lines in the last meeting also, I had some sort of a thing like, some wait, some sort of a controller or operator which does something like, the translation of the NF. So I also gave a thought of having an operator which does this generic operator, if you see in this slide.
But wouldn't that be the intent? Okay, so
Yeah, I mean,
the KPIs are. I mean, let's be honest. Nephio should not be defining the KPIs. It should be 3GPP standards.
I agree.
And then when we create this, it's basically more or less like, what kind of metrics and aggregates maps to that particular KPI, or if they already expose it, which is not the case in 3.5GZ, obviously. But then for other commercial ones, they may actually already expose the metrics that maps directly to the 3GPP one.
We just want to get started with this thing.
Yeah.
Maybe then we will see about that.
But framework-wise, it would be nice to assume they don't, and then we need, let's say, metrics A, B, and C, and D from this vendor for us to calculate the particular API that you want to expose. Then what kind of framework are we looking at, right? So is that going to be done on workload cluster? Is it going to be done with management cluster? And those are the questions that I would like to see.
But so the first question that I would have is, do we want one scraper for the whole because I think it has to sit in the workload cluster because it has to be local.
Yeah, that one's sure. Yeah.
So do we want one for everything or not?
One per pod, one per service. That's actually a little too much, right?
I mean, let me put it this way. Let's say you have we have OAI and 3.5GC. Do you want a single scraper? Let's call it. Let's put it like that. Maybe we'll have multiple depending on different use cases and stuff like that. But is it per workload itself, or is it more generic?
Does it have any implications on how the Prometheus server can scale? How do they have
much, but not so much. But of course, you need more endpoints and stuff like that. But I think Prometheus is basically polling, right? So it's very from the point of view, it scales pretty well, right? So of course, you don't have very real time, so it's not like instantaneous, but it's okay, I think, for this type of use case. But so for me, the first question is, do we so the reason I'm saying that is that if we want to make it generic, right, which I would like, I'm more of a fan of, because otherwise, the problem to be solved if you make it generic is the routing, right? is you have to basically have an ability. Let's say if you have a single scraper and you have both OAI and you have free 5GC, you need a way to route the traffic to the necessary element, right, in that scraper. So
yeah.
that's
Each of them have to have their IP source IP. Oh, actually, source IP would the port that you expose, but each
you
of
need
them
to
would have
somehow
to.
discover or register
Yeah,
the element.
each of them would have to discover the server,
Yeah.
and then be able to authenticate, and then start, and then allow them to start polling.
Yeah, so that's one. So that's one element we need to decide upon. But okay, I think because that's so the routing is then important, and then from the moment you have the routing sorted out, it's very straightforward because you start collecting it, and then I think the question is, the next question is, do you go for a generic metric collection system which has an adapter inside of the element? So for example, let's say I used, and this is also a Google thing, is we use a lot GNMI, right? So GNMI is a bit of what I see a very nice mechanism to collect these things. So you can do on change or you can do time based. But then you need somehow an adapter to be able to mediate. So for example, if you have an SNMP thingy inside of the node, you need an adapter towards GNMI, which is also fairly straightforward to do. And in that type of scenario, you have you kind of have a side. Either the element itself has it out of the box, right? Or you have to build a mediator, which you could do through a sidecar or something like that, right? So these are all kinds of things that we have to decide upon on how to do it, or we have to decide upon these type of things as a framework. And okay, yeah.
So I think local collectors, that's one. I think that's definitely we need one. Are we ever going to run enough diverse workloads? Well, not diverse workload, because it is actually they scrape directly from the workload. Diverse workload in the workload clusters, such that we would like the unit of scrapers to be scaling out as this set of workload comes out. I mean, let's for argument's sake, for some whatever reasons, we put an SMF and UPF on the same. You don't, but then let's say you put that on there, or UPF and like a CP or something on the same cluster.
But scale is so I think there is two different scale.
Do we want to segregate them? I think that's the bigger question.
Yeah, so I think it's more of an operational, or let's say whether people want or allow those metrics to be shared. Because scaling out, I think you can do whether you do it generic or individual. I don't.
Yeah, no. Well, not scaling out. Yeah, but do we create one on a different diverse type? Yeah, because by itself, obviously, it scales out by itself.
And I think we should allow that, but that for me doesn't mean that you have to segregate it completely. So in my view, it could be that you have an infra collector and you have a network function collector, right? So I see that as a possibility, but you could also combine them. I think we should. The way I look at this is we should not dictate that to the operator. It's a choice, because if they really want to segregate it, they put two instances. But the implementation is the same, except that one will see infra metrics and the other will see NF metrics, right? So, but it's just a matter of which.
Do you mean that's a choice for users, or is it a choice for a network function vendor?
No, the choice for the operator, so the service provider.
Operator.
Right,
okay.
because
operator. Okay, operator.
Sorry, yeah. I changed terminology. Let's call it service provider, or yeah,
user.
Yeah. The user or the consumer of the system.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that is what I was saying. If this can be driven by the user
configurable because of whatever.
User
yeah.
So whatever he wants from here, the instances of those can be created here at the workload cluster, and that specifically gets the information which the user wants, right?
Yeah, but I'm thinking at the moment I'm talking about what happens on the workload cluster at the moment only. So personally, I would love to build a generic, at least from a Nephio point of view, I think we want to build a generic metric collector. But what I'm trying to say is that if you need an instance for let's say user A and another instance for user group B, if you will, on the workload cluster, that we should allow, right? So the architecture should not dictate.
So a question going back to this, is it possible for the network function operators to be able to read the metrics?
The network function operator to read the
Yeah, so
metric.
running on the workload cluster. So let's say the 35GC
Yes,
operators. So you're scraping not from them, you're scraping from the workload directly. And then the operator would like to, I want to get that information.
Yes, it goes to the metric service in the workload cluster and retrieve them, right?
I see. Okay. So the scraper itself would be exposing a service for someone to
Yes.
be able to pull that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Marcin, I think you have not spoken much.
Maybe we should make a different drawing than what we discussed, because in my view, we should first look at the workload cluster, because the other piece will be a consequence of it. At least that's my.
Yeah, the other one is just a Prometheus server that pulls directly from that. Yeah, so it shouldn't be that bad. I mean, the one on top of that would be mapping those metrics into whatever KPI exposed, but then
Yes,
we can talk about that later. Yeah.
Now the
I think
challenge of this, when I was just thinking, because I'm thinking out loud, is that if you make two of the same collectors, of course, the challenge that we have is the CRDs, right? So how do you route one to one collector and the other one to another collector?
Can we not give it to the overall Prometheus one in the management cluster, like all sends to the upper?
No, the CLD is to explicitly tell the scraper what to scrape on the workload cluster. So in that case, they're watching a particular resource. In that case, in Vim's case, they're watching the same resource if we create multiple instances.
And one way to solve it, you could solve it, is that you have two separate namespaces, and that the controller or the CRD is namespace bound. So that's one way to do it.
You can do that, and then the namespace needs to be very well known. Then, if we're going to, the segregation would be like infra versus NF, then we know exactly where the scraper would be like instantiated. We still have to create.
That would be even true if they are generic, right? Because you will have to subscribe to a service somehow, so you have to find the service name, which probably is in the namespace, I guess, right? So I think even for a very generic one, I think that's true. But so the way to segregate them, even with the same CRD name, is by having a namespace based operator, so that you, which is, I think, is not, it's an option, right? I'm just thinking. Throwing my brain. I just throwing ideas or things out.
I mean, I haven't written it, but then I would imagine it wouldn't be that bad to be able to. It should be very doable on deployment, that you can limit them. You can limit them into a namespace in terms of watching.
Yes, so and then if you put another one on another namespace, the routing of the CR will also the watch will happen automatically, right? That's the way.
So if we can do a namespace based operator, then obviously that would be the case. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
That's a good thing to actually kind of think about, to kind of investigate.
Okay.
So maybe we should. Go ahead.
Maybe we should do a drawing or something like that, what we are discussing, because maybe it's not so clear.
Yes.
Yeah. So your no exporter is basically the scraper anyway. So that's okay. Yeah. And then whatever implementation you get it from Vim, you want to Ray on your own, you get something else from any open source place that is actually looks really nice. That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that. Sure.
You can first do that PLC and
I want to get started with that,
and then get a consensus from I guess the few of us before we get to the proposal to SIG 2. So that, and then how do we want to, so that's a possibility that we want to be a user configurable scraper. This exporter could be running separate in different namespace and things, so that they're responsible for different sets of metrics.
Yeah, if you do a generic scraper, if you will, whether you segregate them in two or not, the thing that we have to sort out is routing, right? And registration. So basically, if, let's say 35GC, or let's say AMF or something like that, you need to be able to, if you have a CRD on that scraper, you need to route it to the proper element. Or you have to subscribe to the proper element with respect to the metric, right?
Mhm.
So that's the thing that you have to.
Well, on that side, so you're reading, you're pulling the things that you're interested in.
Yes,
From
but you have
the
to
villages and
find
everything.
the right element for it, right? So that's the
Mhm.
thing that you have to solve. So the way or we could do that is with a prefix or something like that, or a namespace. So like you say 35gc.nephio.com or something like that, or
Mhm.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that has been slash UPF or something, and that
Mhm.
has been registered.
So the idea is the CLD is already telling you explicitly that you're pulling the metrics, packet count that n4 that 35gc.nephio.org, for example, right, or whatever. So
So my idea was, for example, say 35gc slash UPF, right? To make it simple, dash packet count, right? Or slash packets count. So by doing something like that, you can build a very generic CRD, right? That basically says, I want this metric with 35gc slash UPF slash packet
so
count.
there'll be some sort of that would be some sort of translations that needs to happen on that front. That they're
Not
pulling.
translation, not translation is routing, right? Because see, let's say I have OAI and I have 35GC. Let's make it simple, right? One is UPF, one is SMF, okay? So now I have a CRD, right? That says I want metrics from the 35GC one, or I want metrics from the OAI one, or I want both, right? The scraper, if you will, needs to know where to find which metric from, right?
Yes.
So
So
that's
they have
thing.
they have to understand the vendor exposing.
I
some
mean,
sort of
it's
metric.
a name. So we agree on a registration or a name on how this works, right? So we basically say there's I call it prefix, right? Slash, and then the semantics of what a packet count, whether it's a packet counter or whether it's a certain KPI, that we shouldn't care about, right? We only care. The scraper should only care about the first part of the prefix, if you will, because that will tell him where he has to get the counters from. You see?
Right. So in that case, however, the supported network functions needs to be exposing metrics with a particular name that matches whatever we expected.
Yeah. So every network function, right, has to have what I call a registration. So when they boot up, they basically say, "Hey, metrics for me, you can reach at this endpoint."
Oh,
if you will.
okay. Yeah, that's actually very similar to one idea I had during the production of this. I have something called a metric proxy that would be able to map into different backend network function vendors, and then yeah, but it's not, yeah, it's an exchange, more capability exchange to have a handshake between them, and then understanding that, hey, if I want to get packet counts, what is the name, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, so you need like a prefix, something. Every metric collect or every metric source needs to be identifiable, if you will, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about.
To a categories that Nephio can understand, basically. Yes.
And apart from that, if the general things which we want to collect from that particular pod, right? Like for example, CPU information and all those things, which are very generic and actually can be done with some other scrapper.
Yeah, so we can have, yeah, we can do that. If it's something very standard, obviously we can just adapt. But then if not, then even then Nephio can define, and then the infra provider, the infra controller, or whatever they have on the world cluster would have to register, and then telling them that for me to give that information, you have to poll this metric, basically. Yeah. So it's a pretty much the same operations. Infra versus
each and every pod cannot tell that I'm going to expose this CPU information and all those things. That can be fetched by some other scrapper, generic scrapper, which can scrap pod level information, like what is the CPU stat, min stats, and all those things, right? Net stat.
See, that's the alternative to it is that indeed every NF does it by himself, right? But the question is that a burden on all the NF vendors have to support something like that?
Yeah, I mean that would take a very long time if we. So metrics are exposed as some sort of name, obviously, as everyone knows. So in this case, we are telling if we want to go in and say that I'm interested in UPFN for packet counts or PFCP packets, that number of PFCP sessions that gone through. Then for Nephio, it's a category, it's a thing that I want to get. For each vendor, they may name it differently as a metric. So we have to, and then for infra too, I wouldn't. So I don't know much about AWS, so I can't say for sure. But then Google has its own thing, obviously. And then if AWS things are somehow different, which I would imagine it is different, then they too would have to say that if you want to get CPU memory stats on this particular container, it would be named something in AWS versus Google, GKE versus EKS, for example.
And that's fine, right? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, and that's okay. If they can do that, then we just need to have some sort of registration handshake.
Yeah.
Registration is, I'm okay with the registration when the specific NF wants to expose what kind of KPI I'm telling you. But I'm wondering whether how it's going to work for all sorts of stats which we want, like what I told. So for that also we need registration, or that can be done by the normal scrapper, generic scrapper.
See, the question what we have to ask ourselves is the following: do we care? Okay. So here is the thing, right? So registration is one for routing, right? Is which endpoint is available to us. So that's one thing that you would need potentially, right? The alternative, let's continue on this part. So let's say we need to find out where they are, right? The next thing you could do, I'm not saying we have to do, is that they also expose which metric they basically expose, right? So as such, when you get the CRD, you can validate whether this metric is there and you can immediately reject it or not, right? So that would help with that. But that means that every of these endpoints also have to basically expose the metrics that they have. The alternative to that could be that the CRD and the scraper doesn't care, it just sends it. If it doesn't get anything, so be it, right? It's an operator mistake, but we don't give good feedback. Yeah. The only thing what he'll see is I don't get metrics. Okay, but you subscribe to something that the endpoint doesn't support. So the question is, do we have to be involved in all of that, right? And the alternative to this is that you don't have a generic scraper, if you will, is that each NF has a scraper by itself.
Yeah, I don't think so. There's too burden, right? I think.
So they basically expose Prometheus. So you basically, we could still build a generic scraper that will be then, so all of what we are discussing, so you don't need any of the routing. All we are discussing is that this information, actually, it's a prototype for the NF vendors to include in their network function as a sidecar or something like that. In which case, you don't need the routing necessarily. Right?
Yeah. More of for the generic way of information, like collecting.
Yeah, so you're thinking maybe there's a standard. I don't think so.
No, there's no standard. So what
I think Sandeep seems to indicate that maybe some standards. I don't think there's any standards.
Yeah, there's no standard. I understand that.
Yeah, so we need to find a way to say, as Nephio, a generic we want to collect these information.
Yeah.
And then somehow, so there are a couple different ways to do that, as we said earlier. One of them is, well, you collect everything, period, out of the guy, send it out to the Prometheus servers, and then on management clusters, the registered, the KPI that you said you're interested in, at that moment you start getting that information. You start mapping it. So that's pretty passive, and then it's a lot of information because at that point you already lost the vendor information. Not lost, but then you have to map vendor information down. Whereas your vendor information is already on the workload clusters because the operator A is written specifically for the vendors, and B
Mm.
is specifically written for Nephio. So it's
Mm.
almost as if there could be one thing to do where an operators would then, maybe one of the things that, should be done by the operator. Actually, the operator would be getting information of saying that, oh, as a Nephio compatible element, I need to expose this set of metrics. I need to support this set of KPIs. And then for that, in order to get those KPIs, me as vendor X operator, I understand that for vendor X, I need to, that basically means metrics A for KPI A, metrics ABCD for KPI B, and so on. So now you register those metrics to the scraper, and so the scraper just pull those.
We are putting a standard right now in that case that you
Yeah,
are
so either
standard.
way we have to map it ourselves.
Mm.
Yeah.
See, we are going to do anytime. Basically what we are discussing is a Nephio way of doing it. So I agree it's a kind of standard, but it's a standard with an implementation, right? That we as Nephio community, we believe this is the way.
Yeah, we normally don't call them standards. We just call them, we're building a piece of software, so we need APIs and supported elements. Yeah.
Yeah, Nephio way, you can say the Nephio way.
Yeah, it's the same today.
That's good.
This is the Nephio mechanism. We want vendors to implement, but mediation is going to be required, right? Whether you like it or not. Now, I have the feel, or my experience so far has told me that with containers and stuff like that, so in a container world, you have way more flexibility. Because if the vendor doesn't do the mediator, someone else could do it.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they expose which metrics they have.
So that is what we're going to start with, right? Assuming there is an exposure of the matrices, right? And then from that's where we build it on, right?
Yeah.
So,
now, for me, the fundamental question is: do we agree do we believe that a generic scraper is better than a specific one? I would vote for a generic personally, and the reason is this. So the reason is the following: if I'm a network function vendor, on one hand, I want to expose metrics, but I also want to be able to attach to certain metrics that are not necessarily coming from me. So that could be related to infra or something like that, right? That I also want to have access to. So I would like to have exposure to a generic, let's say, metric system that is able to provide me that information.
Yeah, because the whole idea which we have also discussed in the previous session is that ultimately we want the operator, the gate operator, to take some sort of action, right? Is what I'm thinking. I don't know whether you agree, but somehow, like when he comes to know there is something wrong, the metrics is wrong, the KPI is wrong, and is not as per the intent, it can take some action. How that action can be defined, whether it's a user defined, all the things we'll see later. But as you said, when he gets the information, he can do something about it, and that's the idea, right?
Yes, and my point is this: then depending on the implementation, so I would advocate for the fact that if you have a generic system in the workload cluster, then it shouldn't matter. The way to retrieve it will always be the same, right? So you always get it through the same mechanism. So whether it's, let's say, infra related or NF related, it's a single mechanism that gives you that information. And that's, yeah.
So in that case, what you're saying is that there is some sort of a scraper everywhere in each workload cluster.
Yes.
Right. And each operator which we have deployed here can get that information. Let's say I expose those information in, say, 8080 port/matrices, and that is what we build it. This is what we build it. And here also 8080/matrices. And then each and every operator can connect to them and get whatever information which they want. It may give them all, maybe it has some sort of a different types of API, which gives you different KPI based on the different name which you supply. But this should be there. This generic thing should be there in each workload cluster. Is what I think my understanding is. What you're saying.
Yeah, that's what yeah, indeed. What I would not advocate is that we are going to define all the metrics. We need to have a mechanism to say so which metric belongs to which element, if you will, right? Or which resource. So that's important, I think.
You
But
can do that, yes.
the semantics of the metric itself, I don't think we should have any say on that. And what I'm trying to say is that, for example, if you are a network function and you are deployed on AWS, it might be, or on Google, it might be that you have to have a different metric that you subscribe to retrieve the similar information. But the system itself that you consume is the same. So it will be a data-driven thing. The infrastructure will be the same, but the configuration on how to deploy will be a bit different potentially. But I think you cannot avoid that, in my view, unless you basically try to standardize everything, which is impossible.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have good thing to start up with, and slowly by slowly we can review what is the right direction, and that's, I think I can start with this little bit, right?
Marcin, you have been very quiet.
Yeah, I've been asking him, please tell something.
No, it's just that you guys have a head start and I'm catching up. I'm not very opinionated in this topic yet, so but I will be in the future.
Okay. But I think what I would suggest is that we first flush out these building blocks, right? Because I'm not saying that what I'm saying here is the right thing to do. So we should probably sketch a little bit the building blocks that we need to accomplish this, and maybe discuss various alternatives and come to a conclusion on which one we pick. You see?
Yeah. I think, I agree with the point, and maybe I can work on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that we can at least have a little bit of
because you can write out a little bit of options on each of the little areas, I guess, that we have.
Yes, we can do that. I'll do that.
And by doing so, we already have because I think we still have to discuss this to the wider team at some point, right?
Yeah, of course.
Or we just do first prototyping and then we kind of bring it.
Yeah, that will be thing we discuss here, and when we all in a sync, we can take it there.
Bring it to that. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I think what we should, what I propose is that we basically flush out some of these options, but maybe I would suggest let's focus on the workload cluster, because I think management cluster, I think is fairly straightforward, because once you have the metrics, it's basically getting them there, and I potentially also need to get a CRD from there, but that's probably not going to be the most difficult part, is what I'm trying to get to.
Also, by the way, why do we keep skipping regional cluster? Are we not interested in the control plane at all, or?
Yeah, we are just abstracting it. So for workload is a combination of edge and regional, or far edge, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's any type.
Anything that isn't management cluster.
Yes, correct.
All right, I get you.
Yeah, we are abstracting it a bit, but yeah, it's anything. Yeah, correct. Steven said it very well. Anything that's not management cluster.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so this is still on documentations. I was hoping after today we'll be like more going towards the PLC type thing.
Yeah, I was also a bit inclined to that.
That's why I named the meeting this way. I was hoping we'll be moving towards PLC.
Yeah, but I take the point.
We have good enough like number of potential contributors that we should at some point kick off some sort of work stream.
Yeah, I mean, in parallel, I'll do that in my personal capacity, whatever I could do the POC to get the information, right? That's okay. But what Wim said is also the right way, I think.
No, yeah. So
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't put a lot of effort, right? I mean, I think what's important is the building blocks and
Mm.
a little pros and cons, because I just brain dump myself what I
Yeah.
just. I'm not saying I haven't thought this through properly, to be honest. So,
Yes.
so it's. I think before writing code, it's always good to at
Yes.
least have a bit of an idea. Okay, I think this is more or less what we want to achieve, and then I think, then you don't have to rewrite the code all the time.
True. True. True.
So then at least, yeah, at least that's how I try to work. But I'm not so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree. Yeah. So we'll do that, and then we can maybe discuss in maybe next week and see. We have time, 7 days, so we can something will come up for
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
Right. Then thank you.
Mhm.
And as I said in the SDK things, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, SDK thing is there. Yeah, I won't be in that meeting tomorrow, unfortunately.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah,
Then I already posted. It's a postpone
Yeah.
for next week. No problem.
Yeah, I have a conflict, so yeah, I'll join next Tuesday.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks. The point taken. We'll work on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I mean,
All right.
keep discussing on the channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's something Marcin is particularly interested, you should raise it, and then we can talk about that during on the channel too. We don't have to wait
Yes.
for the next meeting. Certain ideas and things that you think we should pursue.
Yeah.
Yeah, of
And this
course.
record.
Go
Sorry.
ahead,
So Marcin, sorry.
Marcin. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that I'll probably look into some generic runtime metrics that wouldn't burden the vendors with additional work, and I'll just keep you guys updated on the Slack channel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's another area that we don't have, so that would be great.
Yeah. And this recording, if it's available on,
Yeah, I will put it. I'll put it up to YouTube.
Thank you.
Yeah, I usually do
I'll
that for
refer it
my
again.
own ones, at least.
Yeah, for me too. Also, I need to refer it again. The things which we discussed. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, have a good day.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks. See you
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. Good night. Bye.
Bye.